Generation Z, colloquially known as Zoomers, is the demographic cohort succeeding Millennials and preceding Generation Alpha. Researchers and popular media use the mid to late 1990s as starting birth years and the early 2010s as ending birth years. Most members of Generation Z are children of Generation X. As the first social generation to have grown up with access to the Internet and portable digital technology from a young age, members of Generation Z, even if not necessarily digitally literate, have been dubbed digital natives. Moreover, the negative effects of screen time are most pronounced in adolescents compared to younger children. Compared to previous generations, members of Generation Z from some developed nations tend to be well-behaved, abstemious, and risk-averse. They tend to live more slowly than their predecessors when they were their age, have lower rates of teenage pregnancies, and consume alcohol less often. Generation Z teenagers are more concerned than older generations with academic performance and job prospects, and are better at delaying gratification than their counterparts from the 1960s despite concerns to the contrary. Sexting among adolescents has grown in prevalence. The consequences of this remain poorly understood. Additionally, Gen Z subcultures have been quieter, though they have not necessarily disappeared. Globally, there is evidence that the average age of pubertal onset among girls has decreased considerably compared to the 20th century, with implications for their welfare and their future. Additionally, the prevalence of allergies among adolescents and young adults in Generation Z is greater than the general population. There is greater awareness and diagnosis of mental health conditions, and sleep deprivation is more frequently reported. In many countries, Gen Z youth are more likely to be diagnosed with intellectual disabilities and psychiatric disorders than older generations. Around the world, members of Generation Z are spending more time on electronic devices and less time reading books than before, with implications for their attention spans, vocabulary, academic performance, and future economic contributions. In Asia, educators in the 2000s and 2010s typically sought out and nourished top students. In Western Europe and the United States, the emphasis was on poor performers. Furthermore, East Asian and Singaporean students consistently earned the top spots in international standardized tests in the 2010s. Etymology and nomenclature. The name Generation Z is a reference to the fact that it is the second generation after Generation X, continuing the alphabetical sequence from Generation Y. Other proposed names for the generation include iGeneration, Homeland Generation, NetGen, Digital Natives, Neo-Digital Natives, Pluralist Generation, Internet Generation, Centennials, and Post-Millennials. The term Internet Generation is in reference to the fact that the generation is the first to have been born after the mass adoption of the Internet. Psychology professor and author Jean Twenge used the term iGeneration, originally intending to use it as the title of her 2006 book about millennials, Generation Me, before being overruled by her publisher, Atria Publishing Group. At that time, there were iPods and iMac computers but no iPhones or iPads. Twenge later used the term for her 2017 book iGen. The name has also been asserted to have been created by demographer Cheryl Russell in 2009. In 2014, author Neil Howe coined the term Homeland Generation as a continuation of the Strauss-Howe generational theory with William Strauss. The term homeland refers to being the first generation to enter childhood after protective surveillance state measures, like the Department of Homeland Security, were put into effect following the September 11 attacks. The Pew Research Center surveyed the various names for this cohort on Google Trends in 2019 and found that in the U.S., the term Generation Z was overwhelmingly the most popular. The Merriam-Webster and Oxford dictionaries both have official entries for Generation Z. In Japan, the cohort is described as Neo-Digital Natives, a step beyond the previous cohort described as Digital Natives. Digital natives primarily communicate by text or voice, while Neo-Digital Natives use video, video telephony, and movies. This emphasizes the shift from PC to mobile and text to video among the neo-digital population. Zoomer is an informal term used to refer to members of Generation Z, often in an ironic, humorous, or mocking tone. It combines the shorthand boomer, referring to baby boomers, with the Z from Generation Z. Prior to this, Zoomer was used in the 2000s to describe particularly active baby boomers. Zoomer in its current incarnation skyrocketed in popularity in 2018, when it was used in a 4cha an internet meme mocking Gen Z adolescents via a Wojak caricature dubbed a Zoomer. Merriam-Webster's records suggest the use of the term Zoomer in the sense of Generation Z dates back at least as far as 2016. It was added to the Merriam-Webster dictionary in October 2021. Date and age range. The Oxford Dictionaries describes Generation Z as the generation born in the late 1990s or the early 21st century, perceived as being familiar with the use of digital technology, the Internet, and social media from a very young age. The Oxford Learners' Dictionaries describes Gen Z as the group of people who were born between the late 1990s and the early 2010s. The Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary defines Generation Z as the generation of people born in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The Pew Research Center specified 1997 as their starting birth year for Generation Z, choosing this date for different formative experiences, such as new technological and socio-economic developments, as well as growing up in a world after the September 11 attacks. Pew has not specified an endpoint for Generation Z, but used 2012 as a tentative endpoint for their 2019 report. Major media outlets have cited Pew's definition, including The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, PBS, NBC News, NPR, The Washington Post, CNBC, Axios, Forbes, Newsweek, and Time magazine. Statistics Canada cites Pew Research Centre and describes Generation Z as spanning from 1997 to 2012. The United States Library of Congress explains that defining generations is not an exact science, although cites Pew's 1997 to 2012 definition to define Generation Z in one of their consumer research reports. Gallup and Ipsos Mori start Generation Z at 1997. The Associated Press also use 1997 as the starting point for Gen Z. USA Today cites 1997 to 2012 as Generation Z. A U.S. Census publication in 2020 described Generation Z as the young and mobile population with oldest members of the cohort born after 1996. William H. Frey, Senior Fellow of the Brookings Institution, cited Pew Research Center's definition in their 2020 census analysis. Psychologist Jean Twenge has defined Generation Z as the I-gene ration using a range of those born between 1995 and 2012. Australia's McCrindle Research Centre defines Generation Z as those born between 1995 and 2009. Various media outlets have used 1995 as the starting birth year to describe Gen Z, including United Press International, Financial Times, Fortune, CBS News, Inc., and Bloomberg Law. The World Economic Forum, Deloitte, McKinsey, and PricewaterhouseCoopers also use 1995 as the starting point for Gen Z. The Center for Generational Kinetics defined Generation Z as those born from 1996 to 2015. Individuals born in the Millennial and Generation Z cusp years have been sometimes identified as a microgeneration with characteristics of both generations. The most common name given for these cuspers is Zillennials. Arts and culture. Happiness and personal values. The Economist has described Generation Z as a more educated, well-behaved, stressed and depressed generation in comparison to previous generations. In 2016, the Varkey Foundation and Populus conducted an international study examining the attitudes of over 20,000 people aged 15 to 21 in 20 countries: Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Israel, Italy, Japan, New Zealand, Nigeria, Russia, South Africa, South Korea, Turkey, the United Kingdom, and the United States. They found that Gen Z youth were happy overall with the states of affairs in their personal lives. The most unhappy young people were from South Korea and Japan, while the happiest hailed from Indonesia and Nigeria. In order to determine the overall happiness score for each country, researchers subtracted the percentage of people who said they were unhappy from that of those who said they were happy. The most important sources of happiness were being physically and mentally healthy, having a good relationship with one's family, and one's friends. In general, respondents who were younger and male tended to be happier. Religious faith came in last at 44%. Nevertheless, religion was a major source of happiness for Gen Z youth from Indonesia, Nigeria, Turkey, China, and Brazil. The top reasons for anxiety and stress were money and school, social media and having access to basic resources finished the list, both at 10%. Concerns over food and water were most serious in China, India, and Indonesia. Young Indians were also more likely than average to report stress due to social media. According to the aforementioned study by the Varkey Foundation, the most important personal values to these people were helping their families and themselves get ahead in life, followed by honesty. Looking beyond their local communities came last at 6%. Familial values were especially strong in South America, while individualism and the entrepreneurial spirit proved popular in Africa. People who influenced youths the most were parents, friends, and teachers. Celebrities and politicians came last. In general, young men were more likely to be influenced by athletes and politicians than young women, who preferred books and fictional characters. Celebrity culture was especially influential in China and Nigeria, and particularly irrelevant in Argentina and Turkey. For young people, the most important factors for their current or future careers were the possibility of honing their skills and income, while the most unimportant factors were fame and whether or not the organization they worked for made a positive impact on the world. The most important factors for young people when thinking about their futures were their families and their health. The welfare of the world at large and their local communities bottomed the list. Common culture. During the 2000s and especially the 2010s, youth subcultures that were as influential as what existed during the late 20th century became scarcer and quieter, at least in real life though not necessarily on the internet, and more ridden with irony and self-consciousness due to the awareness of incessant peer surveillance. In Germany, for instance, youth appears more interested in a more mainstream lifestyle with goals such as finishing school, owning a home in the suburbs, maintaining friendships and family relationships, and stable employment, rather than popular culture, glamour, or consumerism. Boundaries between the different youth subcultures appear to have been blurred, and nostalgic sentiments have risen. Although an aesthetic dubbed cottagecore in 2018 has been around for many years, it has become a subculture of Generation Z, especially on various social media networks in the wake of the mass lockdowns imposed to combat the spread of COVID-19. It is a form of escapism and aspirational nostalgia. Cottagecore became even more popular thanks to the commercial success of the 2020 album Folklore by singer and songwriter Taylor Swift. Nostalgia culture among Generation Z even extends to the usage of automobiles. In some countries, such as Indonesia, there are social media communities surrounding the purchasing used cars from earlier decades. A survey conducted by OnePoll in 2018 found that while museums and heritage sites remained popular among Britons between the ages of 18 and 30, 19% did not visit one in the previous year. There was a big gender gap in attitudes, with 16% of female respondents and 26% of male respondents saying they never visited museums. Generation Z preferred staying home and watching television or browsing social media networks to visiting museums or galleries. The researchers also found that cheaper tickets, more interactive exhibitions, a greater variety of events, more food and beverage options, more convenient opening hours, and greater online presence could attract the attention of more young people. On the other hand, vintage fashion is growing in popularity among Millennial and Generation Z consumers. A 2019 report by Childwise found that children between the ages of 5 and 16 in the UK spent an average of 3 hours each day online. Around 70% watched Netflix in the past week and only 10% watched their favorite programs on television. Among those who watched on-demand shows, 58% did so on a mobile phone, 51% on a television set, 40% via a tablet, 35% on a gaming console, and 27% on a laptop. About 1 out of 4 came from families with voice command computer assistants such as Alexa. YouTube and Snapchat are the most popular gateways for music and video discovery. Childwise also found that certain television series aired between the 1990s and early 2000s, such as Friends, proved popular among young people of the 2010s. Figures from Nielsen and Magna Global revealed that the viewership of children's cable television channels such as Disney Channel, Cartoon Network, and Nickelodeon continued their steady decline from the early 2010s, with little to no alleviating effects due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced many parents and their children to stay at home. On the other hand, streaming services saw healthy growth. Disney Channel in particular lost a third of their viewers in 2020, leading to closures in Scandinavia, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Southeast Asia. During the first 2 decades of the 21st century, writing and reading fan fiction and creating fandoms of fictional works became a prevalent activity worldwide. Demographic data from various depositories revealed that those who read and wrote fan fiction were overwhelmingly young, in their teens and 20s, and female. For example, an analysis published in 2019 by data scientists Cecilia Aragon and Katie Davis of the site fanfiction.net showed that some 60 billion words of contents were added during the previous 20 years by 10 million English-speaking people whose median age was 1512 years. Fan fiction writers base their work on various internationally popular cultural phenomena such as K-pop, Star Trek, Harry Potter, Twilight, Doctor Who, Star Wars, and various works of Walt Disney, known as canon, as well as other things they considered important to their lives, like natural disasters. Much of fan fiction concerns the romantic pairing of fictional characters of interest, or shipping. Aragon and Davis argued that writing fan fiction stories could help young people combat social isolation and hone their writing skills outside of school in an environment of like-minded people where they can receive constructive feedback, what they call distributed mentoring. Informatics specialist Rebecca Black added that fan fiction writing could also be a useful resource for English language learners. Indeed, the analysis of Aragon and Davis showed that for every 650 reviews a fan fiction writer receives, their vocabulary improved by 1 year of age, though this may not generalize to older cohorts. On the other hand, children browsing fan fiction contents might be exposed to cyberbullying, crude comments, and other inappropriate materials. Generation Z has a plethora of options when it comes to music consumption, allowing for a highly personalized experience. According to digital media company Sweetie-Hi's 2018 Gen Z Music Consumption and Spending Report, Spotify ranked first for music listening among Gen Z females, terrestrial radio ranked second, while YouTube was reported to be the preferred platform for music discovery. Additional research showed that within the past few decades, popular music has gotten slower, that majorities of listeners young and old preferred older songs rather than keeping up with new ones, that the language of popular songs was becoming more negative psychologically, and that lyrics were becoming simpler and more repetitive, approaching one-word sheets, something measurable by observing how efficiently lossless compression algorithms handled them. Sad music is quite popular among adolescents, though it can dampen their moods, especially among girls. A 2020 survey conducted by the Center for Generational Kinetics, on 1,000 members of Generation Z and 1,000 millennials, suggests that Generation Z still would like to travel, despite the COVID-19 pandemic and the recession it induced. However, Generation Z is more likely to look carefully for package deals that would bring them the most value for their money, as many of them are already saving money for buying a house and for retirement, and they prefer more physically active trips. Mobile-friendly websites and social media engagements are both important. In South Korea, people below the age of 40 are increasingly interested in relocating from the cities, especially Seoul, to the countryside and working on the farm. Working in a conglomerate like Samsung or Hyundai no longer appeals to young people, many of whom prefer to avoid becoming a workaholic or are pessimistic about their ability to be as successful as their fathers. They take advantage of the internet to market and sell their fresh produce. In the United Kingdom, teenagers now prefer to get their news from social media networks such as Instagram and TikTok and the video sharing site YouTube rather than more traditional media, such as radio or television. Reading habits. In New Zealand, child development psychologist Tom Nicholson noted a marked decline in vocabulary usage and reading among school children, many of whom are reluctant to use the dictionary. According to a 2008 survey by the National Education Monitoring Project, about 1 in 5 4-year and 8-year pupils read books as a hobby, a 10% drop from 2000. In the United Kingdom, a survey of 2,000 parents and children from 2013 by Nielsen Book found that 36% of children read books for pleasure on a daily basis, 60% on a weekly basis, and 72% were read to by their parents at least once per week. Among British children, the most popular leisure activities were watching television, reading, social networking, watching YouTube videos, and playing games on mobile phones. Between 2012 and 2013, children reported spending more time with video games, YouTube, and texting but less time reading. Among children between the ages of 11 and 17, the share of non-readers grew from 13% to 27% between 2012 and 2013. Those who read once to thrice a month dropped from 45% to 38%, those who read for no more than an average of 15 minutes per week rose from 23% to 27%, those who read between 15 and 45 minutes per week declined from 23% to 17%, and those who read at least 45 minutes a week grew slightly from 15% to 16%. A survey by the National Literacy Trust from 2019 showed that only 26% of people below the age of 18 spent at least some time each day reading, the lowest level since records began in 2005. Interest in reading for pleasure declined with age, with 5 to 8-year-olds being twice as likely to say they enjoyed reading compared to 14 to 16-year-olds. There was a significant gender gap in voluntary reading, with only 47% of boys compared to 60% of girls said they read for pleasure. 1 in 3 children reported having trouble finding something interesting to read. The aforementioned Nielsen Book survey found that the share of British households with at least one electronic tablet rose from 24% to 50% between 2012 and 2013. According to a 2020 ChildWise report based on interviews with 2,200 British children between the ages of 5 and 16, young people today are highly dependent on their mobile phones. Most now get their first device at the age of 7. By the age of 11, having a cell phone became almost universal. Among those aged 7 to 16, the average time spent on the phone each day is 3 1/3 hours. 57% said they went to bed with their phones beside them, and 44% told the interviewers they felt uncomfortable in the absence of their phones. Due to the nature of this technology, cell phones are personal and private devices. It can be difficult for parents to monitor their children's activities and shield them from inappropriate content. Demographics. Although many countries have aging populations and declining birth rates, Generation Z is currently the largest generation on Earth. Bloomberg's analysis of United Nations data predicted that, in 2019, members of Generation Z accounted for 2.47 billion of the 7.7 billion inhabitants of Earth, surpassing the millennial population of 2.43 billion. The generational cutoff of Generation Z and Millennials for this analysis was placed at 2000 to 2001. Africa. Generation Z currently comprises the majority of the population of Africa. In 2017, 60% of the 1.2 billion people living in Africa fell below the age of 25. In 2019, 46% of the South African population, or 27.5 million people, are members of Generation Z. Statistical projections from the United Nations in 2019 suggest that, in 2020, the people of Niger had a median age of 15.2, Mali 16.3, Chad 16.6, Somalia, Uganda, and Angola all 16.7, the Democratic Republic of the Congo 17.0, Burundi 17.3, Mozambique and Zambia both 17.6. This means that more than half of their populations were born in the first 2 decades of the 21st century. These are the world's youngest countries by median age. Asia. According to a 2020 McKinsey & Company analysis, Generation Z will account for a quarter of the population of the Asia-Pacific region by 2025. As a result of cultural ideals, government policy, and modern medicine, there have been severe gender population imbalances in China and India. According to the United Nations, in 2018, there were 112 Chinese males for every 100 females ages 15 to 29. In India, there were 111 males for every 100 females in that age group. China had a total of 34 million excess males and India 37 million, more than the entire population of Malaysia. Together, China and India had a combined 50 million excess males under the age of 20. Such a discrepancy fuels loneliness epidemics, human trafficking, and prostitution, among other societal problems. Population pyramids of China, India, Japan, and Singapore in 2016. Europe. Out of the approximately 66.8 million people of the UK in 2019, there were approximately 12.6 million people in Generation Z, if defined as those born from 1997 to 2012. Generation Z is the most diverse generation in the European Union in regards to national origin. In Europe generally, 13.9% of those ages 14 and younger in 2019 were born in another EU member state, and 6.6% were born outside the EU. In Luxembourg, 20.5% were born in another country, largely within the EU. In Ireland, 12.0% were born in another country. In Sweden, 9.4% were born in another country, largely outside the EU. In Finland, 4.5% of people aged 14 and younger were born abroad and 10.6% had a foreign background in 2021. However, Gen Z from Eastern Europe is much more homogeneous. In Croatia, only 0.7% of those aged 14 and younger were foreign-born. In the Czech Republic, 1.1% aged 14 and younger were foreign-born. Higher portions of those ages 15 to 29 in 2019 were foreign-born in Europe. Luxembourg had the highest share of young people born in a foreign country. More than 20% of this age group were foreign-born in Cyprus, Malta, Austria, and Sweden. The highest shares of non-EU-born young adults were found in Sweden, Spain, and Luxembourg. Like with those under age 14, countries in Eastern Europe generally have much smaller populations of foreign-born young adults. Poland, Lithuania, Slovakia, Bulgaria, and Latvia had the lowest shares of foreign-born young people, at 1.4 to 2.5% of the total age group. Population pyramids of France, Greece, and Russia in 2016. North America. Data from Statistics Canada published in 2017 showed that Generation Z comprised 17.6% of the Canadian population. A report by demographer William Frey of the Brookings Institution stated that in the United States, the millennials are a bridge between the largely white premillennials and the more diverse post-millennials. Frey's analysis of U.S. Census data suggests that as of 2019, 50.9% of Generation Z is white, 13.8% is black, 25.0% Hispanic, and 5.3% Asian. 29% of Generation Z are children of immigrants or immigrants themselves, compared to 23% of millennials when they were at the same age. Members of Generation Z are slightly less likely to be foreign-born than millennials. The fact that more American Latinos were born in the U.S. rather than abroad plays a role in making the first wave of Generation Z appear better educated than their predecessors. However, researchers warn that this trend could be altered by changing immigration patterns and the younger members of Generation Z choosing alternate educational paths. As a demographic cohort, Generation Z is smaller than the baby boomers and their children, the millennials. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Generation Z makes up about 1/4 of the U.S. population, as of 2015. There was an echo boom in the 2000s, which certainly increased the absolute number of future young adults, but did not significantly change the relative sizes of this cohort compared to their parents. According to a 2022 Gallup survey, 20.8%, or about 1 in 5, members of Gen Z identify as LGBTQ+. Population pyramids of Canada, the United States, and Mexico in 2016. Education. Since the mid-20th century, enrollment rates in primary schools has increased significantly in developing countries. In 2019, the OECD completed a study showing that while education spending was up 15% over the previous decade, academic performance had stagnated. The Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study organization showed that the highest scoring students in mathematics came from Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. In science, the highest scoring countries were Singapore, South Korea, Japan, Russia, and Hong Kong. Different nations and territories approach the question of how to nurture gifted students differently. During the 2000s and 2010s, whereas the Middle East and East Asia and Singapore actively sought them out and steered them towards top programs, Europe and the United States had in mind the goal of inclusion and chose to focus on helping struggling students. In 2010, for example, China unveiled a decade-long national talent development plan to identify able students and guide them into STEM fields and careers in high demand. That same year, England dismantled its National Academy for Gifted and Talented Youth and redirected the funds to help low-scoring students get admitted to elite universities. Developmental cognitive psychologist David Geary observed that Western educators remained resistant to the possibility that even the most talented of school children needed encouragement and support and tended to concentrate on low performers. In addition, even though it is commonly believed that past a certain IQ benchmark, practice becomes much more important than cognitive abilities in mastering new knowledge, recently published research papers based on longitudinal studies, such as the study of mathematically precocious youth and the Duke University Talent Identification Program, suggest otherwise. Since the early 2000s, the number of students from emerging economies going abroad for higher education has risen markedly. This was a golden age of growth for many Western universities admitting international students. In the late 2010s, around 5 million students trotted the globe each year for higher education, with the developed world being the most popular destinations and China the biggest source of international students. In 2019, the United States was the most popular destination for international students, with 30% of its international student body coming from mainland China, Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Japan. However, geopolitical tensions and COVID-19 have ended the golden age for these universities. Health issues. Mental. Data from the British National Health Service showed that between 1999 and 2017, the number of children below the age of 16 experiencing at least one mental disorder increased from 11.4% to 13.6%. The researcher interviewed older adolescents for the first time in 2017 and found that girls were 2/3 more likely than younger girls and twice more likely than boys from the same age group to have a mental disorder. In England, hospitalizations for self-harm doubled among teenage girls between 1997 and 2018, but there was no parallel development among boys. While the number of children receiving medical attention for mental health problems has clearly gone up, this is not necessarily an epidemic as the number of self-reports went up even faster, possibly due to the diminution of stigma. Furthermore, doctors are more likely than before to diagnose a case of self-harm when previously they only treated the physical injuries. A 2020 meta-analysis found that the most common psychiatric disorders among adolescents were ADHD, anxiety disorders, behavioral disorders, and depression, consistent with a previous one from 2015. A 2021 UNICEF report stated that 13% of 10 to 19-year-olds around the world had a diagnosed mental health disorder, whilst suicide was the fourth most common cause of death among 15 to 19-year-olds. It commented that disruption to routines, education, recreation, as well as concern for family income, health, and increase in stress and anxiety, is leaving many children and young people feeling afraid, angry, and concerned for their future. It also noted that the pandemic had widely disrupted mental health services. Sleep deprivation. Cognitive abilities. Physical. A 2015 study found that the frequency of nearsightedness has doubled in the United Kingdom within the last 50 years. Ophthalmologist Steve Schallhorn, chairman of the Optical Express International Medical Advisory Board, noted that research has pointed to a link between the regular use of handheld electronic devices and eye strain. The American Optometric Association sounded the alarm in a similar vein. According to a spokeswoman, digital eye strain, or computer vision syndrome, is rampant, especially as we move towards smaller devices and the prominence of devices increase in our everyday lives. Symptoms include dry and irritated eyes, fatigue, eye strain, blurry vision, difficulty focusing, headaches. However, the syndrome does not cause vision loss or any other permanent damage. To alleviate or prevent eye strain, the Vision Council recommends that people limit screen time, take frequent breaks, adjust the screen brightness, change the background from bright colors to gray, increase text sizes, and blinking more often. Parents should not only limit their children's screen time but should also lead by example. While food allergies have been observed by doctors since ancient times and virtually all foods can be allergens, research by the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota found they are becoming increasingly common since the early 2000s. Today, 1 in 12 American children has a food allergy, with peanut allergy being the most prevalent type. Reasons for this remain poorly understood. Nut allergies in general have quadrupled and shellfish allergies have increased 40% between 2004 and 2019. In all, about 36% of American children have some kind of allergy. By comparison, this number among the Amish in Indiana is 7%. Allergies have also risen ominously in other Western countries. In the United Kingdom, for example, the number of children hospitalized for allergic reactions increased by a factor of 5 between 1990 and the late 2010s, as did the number of British children allergic to peanuts. In general, the better developed the country, the higher the rates of allergies. Reasons for this remain poorly understood. One possible explanation, supported by the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, is that parents keep their children too clean for their own good. They recommend exposing newborn babies to a variety of potentially allergenic foods, such as peanut butter before they reach the age of 6 months. According to this hygiene hypothesis, such exposures give the infant's immune system some exercise, making it less likely to overreact. Evidence for this includes the fact that children living on a farm are consistently less likely to be allergic than their counterparts who are raised in the city, and that children born in a developed country to parents who immigrated from developing nations are more likely to be allergic than their parents are. A research article published in 2019 in the journal The Lancet reported that the number of South Africans aged 15 to 19 being treated for HIV increased by a factor of 10 between 2010 and 2019. This is partly due to improved detection and treatment programs. However, less than 50% of the people diagnosed with HIV went on to receive antiviral medication due to social stigma, concerns about clinical confidentiality, and domestic responsibilities. While the annual number of deaths worldwide due to HIV/AIDS has declined from its peak in the early 2000s, experts warned that this venereal disease could rebound if the world's booming adolescent population is left unprotected. Data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics reveal that 46% of Australians aged 18 to 24, about a million people, were overweight in 2017 and 2018. That number was 39% in 2014 and 2015. Obese individuals face higher risks of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, osteoarthritis, and stroke. The Australian Medical Associated and Obesity Coalition have urged the federal government to levy a tax on sugary drinks, to require health ratings, and to regulate the advertisement of fast foods. In all, the number of Australian adults who are overweight or obese rose from 63% in 2014-15 to 67% in 2017-18. Puberty. In Europe and the United States, the average age of the onset of puberty among girls was around 13 in the early 21st century, down from about 100 years earlier. Early puberty is associated with a variety of mental health issues, such as anxiety and depression, early sexual activity, substance use, tobacco smoking, eating disorders, and disruptive behavioral disorders. Girls who mature early also face higher risks of sexual harassment. Moreover, in some cultures, pubertal onset remains a marker of readiness for marriage, for, in their point of view, a girl who shows signs of puberty might engage in sexual intercourse or risks being assaulted, and marrying her off is how she might be protected. To compound matters, factors known for prompting mental health problems are themselves linked to early pubertal onset. These are early childhood stress, absent fathers, domestic conflict, and low socioeconomic status. Possible causes of early puberty could be positive, namely improved nutrition, or negative, such as obesity and stress. Other triggers include genetic factors, high body mass index, exposure to endocrine-disrupting substances that remain in use, such as bisphenol A and dichlorobenzene, and to banned but persistent chemicals, such as dichlorodiphenyltrichloroethane and dichlorodiphenyldichloroethylene, and perhaps a combination thereof. A 2019 meta-analysis and review of the research literature from all inhabited continents found that between 1977 and 2013, the age of pubertal onset among girls has fallen by an average of almost 3 months per decade, but with significant regional variations, ranging from 10.1 to 13.2 years in Africa to 8.8 to 10.3 years in the United States. This investigation relies on measurements of Thel-Archie using the Tanner scale rather than self-reported Menarche and MRI brain scans for signs of the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis being reactivated. Furthermore, there is evidence that sexual maturity and psychosocial maturity no longer coincide. 21st century youth appears to be reaching the former before the latter. Neither adolescents nor societies are prepared for this mismatch. Political views and participation. In some European democracies, national populist politicians and political parties are the most popular among voters below the age of 40, which includes Generation Z and Millennials. In tandem with more members of Generation Z being able to vote in elections during the late 2010s and early 2020s, the youth vote has increased. On the other hand, in the United States, Generation Z appears thus far to hold similar socio-political views to the Millennials in that they tend to be more left-wing than preceding generations. As of 2019, members of Generation Z in G20 countries prefer a nationalist to a globalist approach to public policy by a clear margin, 51% to 32%. Nationalism was strongest in China, India, South Africa, and Russia, while globalism was strongest in France and Germany. For members of Generation Z, the top 3 priorities for public policy are the stability of the national economy, the quality of education, and the availability of jobs. Questions on immigration receive mixed responses from this cohort. Among developed democracies, young people's faith in the institutions, including their own government, has declined compared to that of previous generations. In early political movements primarily driven by Generation Z was school strike for climate in the late 2010s. The movement involved millions of young people around the world, inspired by the activities of Swedish teenage activist Greta Thunberg. Protest for greater action on climate change. Members of Generation Z who are active in politics are more likely than their elders to avoid buying from or working for companies that do not share their socio-political views, and they take full advantage of the Internet as activists. Religious tendencies. A 2016 survey by Varkey Foundation and Populus conducted on 20,000 people aged 15 to 21 from 20 countries from all inhabited continents revealed that religious faith was influential to 42% of the respondents and inconsequential to 39%. There was, however, a clear difference between the age subgroups, with people 15 to 16 slightly more likely to value religion as important than those aged 19-21. Nevertheless, for 53%, religion influenced the values they hold. In order to further determine the role of religion in young people's lives, the pollsters asked them whether or not it was important to them personally, to their parents, whether their parents' religion determined whom they would marry, and if religion helps them decide whether to be friends with someone. Overall, religion was important to 11% of respondents. But there was a large gap among countries, with Nigeria at one end and Germany and Japan at the other. According to 2015 analysis of the European Values Study in the Handbook of Children and Youth Studies, the majority of young respondents in Europe claimed that they belonged to a Christian denomination, and in most countries, the majority of young people believe in God. The 2016 British Social Attitudes Survey found that 71% of people between the ages of 18 and 24 had no religion, compared to 62% the year before. A 2018 ComRes survey found that slightly more than 1 in 2 of those aged 18 to 24 reported a positive experience with Christians and Christianity. 2/3 of the same age group have never attended church. Among the remaining third, 20% went a few times a year, and 2% multiple times per week. 12% of respondents aged 18 to 24 agreed with the claim that Christians were a bad influence on society, compared to just over half who disagreed. For comparison, 14% of those aged 25 to 34 agreed. In all, 51% of Britons disagreed with the same while 10% agreed. Results from the 2018 ComRes survey were released a day after the Church of England announced it was going to establish more than 100 churches, mainly in urban areas, to attract new followers. Globally, religion is in decline in the Euro-American countries but is growing in the rest of the world. Although the number of atheists, agnostics, and people not affiliated with organized religion continues to grow in Europe and the United States, their percentage of the world population is falling because of their comparatively low fertility rate. In general, the growth or decline of a given religion is due more to age and fertility rather than conversion. Besides the level of education and income, how religious a woman is determines how many children she will bear in her lifetime. For example, in the cities of the Middle East, women who supported Sharia law had a 50% fertility advantage over those who opposed it the most at the turn of the century. According to the World Religious Database, the proportion of the human population identifying with a religion increased from 81% in 1970 to 85% in 2000 and is predicted to rise to 87% in 2025. In addition, the Catholic Church has gained 12% additional followers between 2000 and 2010, mainly from Asia and Africa. In 2018, Muslims had a median age of 23, Hindus 26, Christians 30, Buddhists and the religiously unaffiliated 34, and Jews 36. For comparison, the median age of the global population was 28 in 2018. Overall, Christians have a fertility rate of 2.6, and Muslims 2.9. Islam is the world's fastest growing religion, primarily due to the average younger age and higher fertility rate of Muslims. Meanwhile, the expansion of secularism will slow in Europe as the 21st century progresses. But religion can grow even in otherwise secular societies. For example, in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox Jews comprised just about 5% of the nation's primary school children in 1960, but by the start of the 21st century, one-third of Jewish first graders in Israel came from this religious sect. Ultra-Orthodox Jewish women in Israel had on average 7.5 children compared to their more mainstream counterparts with just over 2 in the early 2000s. In Europe, immigration from the Middle East and Africa is an engine of religious growth. Children of immigrants tend to be about as religious as their parents and consider their religion to be a marker of their ethnic identity, thereby insulating themselves from the secularizing forces of the host society. The other engine is comparatively high fertility and religious endogamy. In France, a white Catholic woman had half a child more than her secular counterparts in the early 2000s. In Spain, that number was 0.77. In the Netherlands, the youngest villages belonged to Orthodox Calvinists, who comprised 7% of the Dutch population by the early 2000s. In Austria, the number of people below the age of 15 who were Muslims rose past the 10% mark in the first decade of the 21st century. In the United Kingdom, over 90% of Muslims married other Muslims by the turn of the millennium, and it is well known that children born into an interfaith marriage tend to be less religious than their parents. Interfaith marriage is in fact a vehicle of secularization. Ultra-Orthodox Jews comprised just 12% of the British Jewish population but 3/4 of Jewish births at the start of the 21st century. In the United States, Catholicism will become the largest religion by 2040 despite considerable losses to secularization and conversion to Protestantism, thanks in no small part to the fact that Latino Catholics had a fertility rate of 2.83 compared to the national average of 2.03 in 2003. Such religious demographic changes will bring about social and political ramifications later in the century. Risky behaviors. Adolescent pregnancy. American adolescents maintained their abstinence from alcohol and sexual intercourse through early adulthood. More broadly, adolescent pregnancy was in decline during the early 21st century all across the industrialized world, due to the widespread availability of contraception and the growing avoidance of sexual intercourse among teenagers. In New Zealand, the pregnancy rate for females aged 15 to 19 dropped from 33 per 1,000 in 2008 to 16 in 2016. Highly urbanized regions had adolescent pregnancy rates well below the national average, whereas Maori communities had much higher than average rates. In Australia, it was 15 per 1,000 in 2015. Alcoholism and substance use. 2020 data from the UK Office for National Statistics showed on a per capita basis, members of Generation Z binged on alcohol 20% less often than millennials. However, 9.9% of people aged 16 to 24 consumed at least one drug in the past month, usually cannabis, or more than twice the share of the population between the ages of 16 and 59. Cannabis has now taken over from the opiates in terms of the most people in treatment for addiction, psychopharmacologist Val Curran of the University College London told The Telegraph. Moreover, the quality and affordability of various addictive drugs have improved in recent years, making them an appealing alternative to alcoholic beverages for many young people, who now have the ability to arrange a meeting with a deal via social media. Addiction psychiatrist Adam Winstock of UCL found using his global drug survey that young people rated cocaine more highly than alcohol on the basis of value for money, 4.8 compared to 4.7 out of 10. As of 2019, cannabis was legal for both medical and recreational use in Uruguay, Canada, and 33 states in the U.S. In the United States, Generation Z is the first to be born into a time when the legalization of marijuana at the federal level is being seriously considered. While adolescents in the late 2010s were more likely to avoid both alcohol and marijuana compared to their predecessors from 20 years before, college-aged youths are more likely than their elders to consume marijuana. Marijuana use in Western democracies was 3 times the global average, as of 2012. And in the U.S., the typical age of first use is 16. This is despite the fact that marijuana use is linked to some risks for young people, such as in the impairment of cognitive abilities and school performance, though a causality has not been established in this case. Youth crime. During the 2010s, when most of Generation Z experienced some or all of their adolescence, reductions in youth crime were seen in some Western countries. A report looking at statistics from 2018 to 2019 noted that the numbers of young people aged 10 to 17 in England and Wales being cautioned or sentenced for criminal activity had fallen by 83% over the previous decade, while those entering the youth justice system for the first time had fallen by 85%. In 2006, 3,000 youths in England and Wales were detained for criminal activity. 10 years later, that number fell below 1,000. In Europe, teenagers were less likely to fight than before. Research from Australia suggested that crime rates among adolescents had consistently declined between 2010 and 2019. In a 2014 report, Statistics Canada stated that police reported crimes committed by persons between the ages of 12 and 17 had been falling steadily since 2006 as part of a larger trend of decline from a peak in 1991. Between 2000 and 2014, youth crimes plummeted 42%, above the drop for overall crime of 34%. In fact, between the late 2000s and mid-2010s, the fall was especially rapid. This was primarily driven by a 51% drop in theft of items worth no more than $5,000 and burglary. The most common types of crime committed by Canadian adolescents were theft and violence. At school, the most frequent offences were possession of cannabis, common assault, and uttering threats. Overall, although they made up only 7% of the population, adolescents stood accused of 13% of all crimes in Canada. In addition, mid to late teens were more likely to be accused of crimes than any other age group in the country. Pornography viewing. A 2020 report by the British Board of Film Classification, available only by request due to the presence of graphic materials, suggests that parents are either in denial or are completely oblivious to the prevalence of pornography viewership by adolescents, with 3/4 telling researchers they do not believe their children consumed such materials. Meanwhile, teenagers are increasingly turning to pornography as a source of information on sexuality, especially what to do during a sexual encounter, as teachers tend to focus on contraception. Over half of the teenagers interviewed told researchers they had viewed pornography, though the actual number is likely higher due to the sensitivity of this topic. While parents generally believe adolescents who view pornography for pleasure tend to be boys, surveys and interviews reveal that this behavior is also common among girls. Most teenagers encounter pornography on a dedicated website, but an increasing number watch it on social media platforms such as Snapchat and WhatsApp. Many told researchers they felt anxious about their body image and the expectations of their potential sexual partners as a result of viewing, and their concerns over violent behavior. About 1/3 of the UK population watches these films, according to industry estimates. This report came as part of an ill-fated attempt by the UK government to introduce age verification to pornographic websites. Family and social life. Upbringing. Sociologists Judith Trees and Julia M. Dadisani analyzed the diaries of 122,271 parents aged 18 to 65 in households with at least one child below the age of 13 from 1965 to 2012 in 11 Western countries: Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, Norway, and Slovenia, and discovered that in general, parents had been spending more and more time with their children. In 1965, a mother spent on average 54 minutes on childcare activities each day, whereas one from 2012 spent almost twice as much, at 104 minutes. Among fathers, the amount of time spent on childcare roughly quadrupled, from 16 minutes in 1965 to 59 in 2012. Parents of all education levels were represented, though those with higher education typically spent much more time with their children, especially university-educated mothers. France was the only exception. French mothers were spending less time with their children, whereas fathers were spending more time. This overall trend reflected the dominant ideology of intensive parenting, the idea that the time parents spend with children is crucial for their development in various areas, and the fact that fathers developed more egalitarian views with regards to gender roles over time and became more likely to want to play an active role in their children's lives. In the United Kingdom, there was a widespread belief in the early 21st century that rising parental, societal, and state concern for the safety of children was leaving them increasingly mollycoddled and slowing the pace they took on responsibilities. The same period saw a rise in child-rearing's position in the public discourse, with parenting manuals and reality TV programs focused on family life, such as Supernanny, providing specific guidelines for how children should be cared for and disciplined. According to Statistics Canada, the number of households with both grandparents and grandchildren remained rare but grew in the early 21st century. In 2011, 5% of Canadian children below the age of 10 lived with a grandparent, up from 3.3% in the previous decade. This is in part because Canadian parents in the early 21st century couldn't afford childcare and often find themselves having to work long hours or irregular shifts. Meanwhile, many grandparents struggled to keep up with their highly active grandchildren on a regular basis due to their age. Because Millennials and members of Generation X tend to have fewer children than their parents, the baby boomers, Each child typically receives more attention from his or her grandparents and parents compared to previous generations. Friendships and socialization. According to the OECD PISA surveys, 15-year-olds in 2015 had a tougher time making friends at school than 10 years prior. European teenagers were becoming more and more like their Japanese and South Korean counterparts in social isolation. This might be due to intrusive parenting, heavy use of electronic devices, and concerns over academic performance and job prospects. A study of social interaction among American teenagers found that the amount of time young people spent with their friends had been trending downwards since the 1970s but fallen into especially sharp decline after 2010. The percentage of students in the 12th grade who said they met with their friends almost every day fell from 52% in 1976 to 28% in 2017. The percentage of that age group who said they often felt lonely increased from 26% in 2012 to 39% in 2017, whilst the percentage who often felt left out increased from 30% to 38% over the same period. Statistics for slightly younger teenagers suggested that parties had become significantly less common since the 1980s. Romance and marriage. According to a 2014 report from UNICEF, some 250 million females were forced into marriage before the age of 15, especially in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Problems faced by child brides include loss of educational opportunity, less access to medical care, higher childbirth mortality rates, depression, and suicidal ideation. In Australia, it was reported in 2017 that growing numbers of older teenage boys and young men were avoiding romantic relationships altogether, citing concerns over the traumatic experiences of older male family members, including false accusations of sexual misconduct or loss of assets and money after a divorce. This social trend, men going their own way, is an outgrowth of the men's rights movement, but one that emphasizes detachment from women as a way to deal with the issues men face. Both sexes have different challenges, we've lost sight of that. We're stuck in a gender war and it's harming our children, psychologist Meredith Fuller told News.com. In China, young people nowadays are much more likely to deem marriage and children sources of stress rather than fulfillment, going against the central government's attempts to increase the birth rate. Women born between the mid-1990s to about 2010 are less interested in getting married than men their own age. As a result of the one-child policy, young Chinese women have become more educated and financially independent than ever before, and this has led to a shift in public attitudes towards career-oriented women. The lying flat movement, popular among Chinese youths, also extends to the domain of marriage and child rearing. Children and parenthood. In line with a fall in adolescent pregnancy in the developed world, which is discussed in more detail elsewhere in this article, there has also been a reduction in the percentage of the youngest adults with children. The Office for National Statistics has reported that the number of babies being born in the United Kingdom to 18-year-old mothers had fallen by 58% from 2000 to 2016, and the amount being born to 18-year-old fathers had fallen by 41% over the same period. Pew Research reports that in 2016, 88% of American women aged 18 to 21 were childless, as opposed to 80% of Generation X and 79% of millennial female youth at a similar age. A 2020 survey conducted by PensionBee in the United Kingdom found that about 10% of non-parents aged 18 to 23 were considering not having children in order to be able to retire earlier. Those in the arts and those in the income bracket £25,001 to £55,000 were most likely to say no to having children. Use of information and communications technologies. Use of ICT in general. Generation Z is one of the first cohorts to have Internet technology readily available at a young age. With the Web 2.0 revolution that occurred throughout the mid-late 2000s and 2010s, they have been exposed to an unprecedented amount of technology in their upbringing, with the use of mobile devices growing exponentially over time. Anthony Turner characterizes Generation Z as having a digital bond to the Internet, and argues that it may help youth to escape from emotional and mental struggles they face offline. According to U.S. consultants Sparks and Honey in 2014, 41% of Generation Z spend more than 3 hours per day using computers for purposes other than schoolwork, compared with 22% in 2004. In 2015, an estimated 150,000 apps, 10% of apps in Apple's App Store, were educational and aimed at children up to college level, though opinions are mixed as to whether the net result will be deeper involvement in learning and more individualized instruction, or impairment through greater technology dependence and a lack of self-regulation that may hinder child development. Parents of Gen Zers fear the overuse of the Internet, and dislike the ease of access to inappropriate information and images, as well as social networking sites where children can gain access to people worldwide. Children reversely feel annoyed with their parents and complain about parents being overly controlling when it comes to their Internet usage. A 2015 study by Microsoft found that 77% of respondents aged 18 to 24 said yes to the statement, "When nothing is occupying my attention, the first thing I do is reach for my phone," compared to just 10% for those aged 65 and over. In a TEDx Houston talk, Jason Dorsey of the Center for Generational Kinetics stressed the notable differences in the way that Millennials and Generation Z consume technology, with 18% of Generation Z feeling that it is okay for a 13-year-old to have a smartphone, compared with just 4% for the previous generation. An online newspaper about texting, SMS and MMS writes that teens own cell phones without necessarily needing them, that receiving a phone is considered a rite of passage in some countries, allowing the owner to be further connected with their peers, and it is now a social norm to have one at an early age. An article from the Pew Research Center stated that nearly 3/4 of teens have access to a smartphone and 30% have a basic phone, while just 12% of teens 13 to 15 say they have no cell phone of any type. These numbers are only on the rise, and the fact that the majority own a cell phone has become one of this generation's defining characteristics. Consequently, 24% of teens go online almost constantly. A survey of students from 79 countries by the OECD found that the amount of time spent using an electronic device has increased, from under 2 hours per weekday in 2012 to close to 3 in 2019, at the expense of extracurricular reading. Psychologists have observed that sexting or the transmission of sexually explicit content via electronic devices has seen noticeable growth among contemporary adolescents. Older teenagers are more likely to participate in sexting. Besides some cultural and social factors such as the desire for acceptance and popularity among peers, the falling age at which a child receives a smartphone may contribute to the growth in this activity. However, while it is clear that sexting has an emotional impact on adolescents, it is still not clear how it precisely affects them. Some consider it a high-risk behavior because of the ease of dissemination to third parties, leading to reputational damage and the link to various psychological conditions including depression and even suicidal ideation. Others defend youth's freedom of expression over the Internet. In any case, there is some evidence that at least in the short run, sexting brings positive feelings of liveliness or satisfaction. However, girls are more likely than boys to be receiving insults, social rejections, or reputational damage as a result of sexting. Digital literacy. Despite being labeled as digital natives, the 2018 International Computer and Information Literacy Study, conducted on 42,000 eighth graders from 14 countries and education systems, found that only 2% of these people were sufficiently proficient with information devices to justify that description, and only 19% could work independently with computers to gather information and to manage their work. ICILS assesses students on two main categories: computer and information literacy, and computational thinking. For CIL, there are 4 levels, 1 to 4, with level 4 being the highest. Although at least 80% of students from most countries tested reached level 1, only 2% on average reached level 4. Countries or education systems whose students scored near or above the international average of 496 in CIL were, in increasing order, France, North Rhine-Westphalia, Portugal, Germany, the United States, Finland, South Korea, Moscow, and Denmark. CT is divided into 4 levels, the upper, middle, and lower regions. International averages for the proportions of students reaching each of these were 18%, 50%, and 32%, respectively. Countries or education systems whose students scored near or above the international average of 500 were, in increasing order, the United States, France, Finland, Denmark, and South Korea. In general, female 8th graders outperformed their male counterparts in CIL by an international average of 18 points but were narrowly outclassed by their male counterparts in CT. In the United States, where the computer-based tests were administered by the National Center for Education Statistics, 72% of 8th graders said they searched for information on the Internet at least once a week or every school day, and 65% reported they were autodidactic information finders on the Internet. Use of social media networks. The use of social media has become integrated into the daily lives of most Gen Zers with access to mobile technology, who use it primarily to keep in contact with friends and family. As a result, mobile technology has caused online relationship development to become a new generational norm. Gen Z uses social media and other sites to strengthen bonds with friends and to develop new ones. They interact with people who they otherwise would not have met in the real world, becoming a tool for identity creation. The negative side to mobile devices for Generation Z, according to Twing, is they are less face-to-face, and thus feel more lonely and left out. Focus group testing found that while teens may be annoyed by many aspects of Facebook, they continue to use it because participation is important in terms of socializing with friends and peers. Twitter and Instagram are seen to be gaining popularity among members of Generation Z, with 24% of teens with access to the Internet having Twitter accounts. This is, in part, due to parents not typically using these social networking sites. Snapchat is also seen to have gained attraction in Generation Z because videos, pictures, and messages send much faster on it than in regular messaging. TikTok has gained increasing popularity among Gen Z users, surpassing Instagram in 2021. So as of 2022, TikTok has around 689 million active users, 43% of whom are from Gen Z based on current growth figures. It is predicted that by the end of 2023, TikTok audience will grow by 1.5 billion active users, 70% of whom will be from Generation Z. Speed and reliability are important factors in members of Generation Z's choice of social networking platform. This need for quick communication is presented in popular Generation Z apps like Vine and the prevalent use of emojis. A study by Gabrielle Borca, et al. Found that teenagers in 2012 were more likely to share different types of information than teenagers in 2006. However, they will take steps to protect information that they do not want being shared, and are more likely to follow others on social media than share. A survey of U.S. teenagers from advertising agency J. Walter Thompson likewise found that the majority of teenagers are concerned about how their posting will be perceived by people or their friends. 72% of respondents said they were using social media on a daily basis, and 82% said they thought carefully about what they post on social media. Moreover, 43% said they had regrets about previous posts. A 2019 Childwise survey of 2,000 British children aged 5 to 16 found that the popularity of Facebook halved compared to the previous year. Children of the older age group, 15 to 16, reported signs of online fatigue, with about 3 of 10 saying they wanted to spend less time on the internet. Effects of screen time. In his 2017 book Irresistible, Professor of Marketing Adam Alter explained that not only are children addicted to electronic gadgets, but their addiction jeopardizes their ability to read nonverbal social cues. A 2019 meta-analysis of thousands of studies from almost 24 countries suggests that while as a whole, there is no association between screen time and academic performance, when the relation between individual screen time activity and academic performance is examined, negative associations are found. Watching television is negatively correlated with overall school grades, language fluency, and mathematical ability, while playing video games was negatively associated with overall school grades only. According to previous research, screen activities not only take away the time that could be spent on homework, physical activities, verbal communication, and sleep, but also diminish mental activities. Furthermore, excessive television viewing is known for harming the ability to pay attention as well as other cognitive functions. It also causes behavioral disorders, such as having unhealthy diets, which could damage academic performance. Excessive video gaming, on the other hand, is known for impairing social skills and mental health, and as such could also damage academic performance. However, depending on the nature of the game, playing it could be beneficial for the child. For instance, the child could be motivated to learn the language of the game in order to play it better. Among adolescents, excessive internet surfing is well known for being negatively associated with school grades, though previous research does not distinguish between the various devices used. Nevertheless, one study indicates that internet access, if used for schoolwork, is positively associated with school grades, but if used for leisure, is negatively associated with it. Overall, the effects of screen time are stronger among adolescents than children. Research conducted in 2017 reports that the social media usage patterns of this generation may be associated with loneliness, anxiety, and fragility, and that girls may be more affected than boys by social media. According to 2018 CDC reports, girls are disproportionately affected by the negative aspects of social media than boys. Researchers at the University of Essex analyzed data from 10,000 families, from 2010 to 2015, assessing their mental health utilizing 2 perspectives: happiness and well-being throughout social, familial, and educational perspectives. Within each family, they examined children who had grown from 10 to 15 during these years. At age 10, 10% of female subjects reported social media use, while this was only true for 7% of the male subjects. By age 15, this variation jumped to 53% for girls, and 41% for boys. This percentage influx may explain why more girls reported experiencing cyberbullying, decreased self-esteem, and emotional instability more than their male counterparts. Other researchers hypothesize that girls are more affected by social media usage because of how they use it. In a study conducted by the Pew Research Center in 2015, researchers discovered that while 78% of girls reported making a friend through social media, only 52% of boys could say the same. However, boys are not explicitly less affected by this statistic. They also found that 57% of boys claimed to make friends through video gaming, while this was only true for 13% of girls. Another Pew Research Center survey conducted in April 2015 reported that women are more likely to use Pinterest, Facebook, and Instagram than men. In counterpoint, men were more likely to utilize online forums, e-chat groups, and Reddit than women. Cyberbullying is more common now than among millennials, the previous generation. It is more common among girls, 22% compared to 10% for boys. This results in young girls feeling more vulnerable to being excluded and undermined. According to a 2020 report by the British Board of Film Classification, many young people felt that the way they viewed their overall body image was more likely the result of the kinds of body images they saw on Instagram. See also: 9X generation, Boomerang generation, Cusper, Generation K, a demographic cohort defined by Noriana Hertz, Generation Z in the United States, Post-90s and Little Emperor Syndrome, Strawberry generation, Thumb tribe, Poriteen.